Hey, today we are starting a new series on how to step into a new normal after a significant life change, whether that's a traumatic event, a crisis, a transition, whatever. We're going to be talking about how to step into a new normal over the next few weeks. And today we're going to be talking about the very first step, and that is assess and prioritize. Here's the deal. When we go through a crisis or a transition, oftentimes that is going to fundamentally shift how we see the world. It gives us a different perspective. It causes maybe us to question our reality or how we've been living life up until this point. Going through some sort of intense life-changing event is going to cause changes in every area. It's a ripple effect. It isn't just going to be like this isolated little thing we put in a box. When we walk through a crisis, a transition, a trauma, whatever it is, it changes us. And the first thing I really want to encourage you with is that's okay. As a matter of fact, it should. Because we are dynamic. As human beings, we are dynamic. We change, we shift, we grow. Anything and anyone who is not growing is dying, is staying stagnant and eventually dying. And actually, even if you look at like the laws of physics and science, even stagnation is still a form of decay. So you're either growing or you're dying. There is actually no middle ground. And so walking through a crisis or a very challenging season is going to trigger a response in us as human beings. And we get the choice on how we respond to that situation. We don't always get to choose the situation. We don't necessarily get to decide if we have to experience it or not. But we get to decide how we experience it and what kind of person we become on the other side and what our attitude is going to be. And so when we're on the other side, we've come out, and I have a whole series that I did last month on how to navigate a crisis season, where I talk more about that choice. But when we're on the other side, crisis is over. The actual event has happened. Now it's time to step into some level of normalcy, some level of life. But here's the deal. We've just been through a life-changing event. It's literally impossible to go back to the way life was before that event happened. Emotionally, it's impossible. Physically, it's impossible. Just on every level. You are a different person by virtue of having experienced whatever it was that you just walked through. And you've gotten to decide if you are a more bitter person who's angry and upset. You get to decide that. Or you could be someone who's better. You've used it. You've allowed that situation to be used by the Lord to refine you, to shape you, to draw you closer to Him. So you are in a actually healthier spiritually state than you were going into the crisis. You get to decide what that looks like. But now we're on the other side. And when we're coming out of a season of crisis, our souls kind of ache for can I please get back to normal? Bad news, like I just said, you're not going to go back to the normal you had before the crisis. But you now have the opportunity to step into a new normal. And that's what we're going to be talking about over the next several weeks. Today, the very first step of that, when you are ready to get out of the crisis mode, out of the survival mode, and start stepping into the more proactive, intentional, maybe even thriving mode, and getting into some sort of a normal. The first step is to assess and prioritize. As I've already said, oftentimes, and not even oftentimes, every time we walk through a crisis, it shifts how we see the world. It impacts us in that way. And it often is going to shift how we want to live our lives. Walking through a really challenging season may cause your values to change. What actually matters to you? What do you want to prioritize in your life? What are you actually wanting to choose? It may mean that some relationships need to have some boundaries set, or need to be kind of pruned. It may mean that you need to plug into different places and different relationships. It could look like different habits. It could look like completely different choices and a complete shift in like everything. It kind of just depends. But a crisis is going to cause a shift. And so one thing that we can do is we can look at that. Sometimes we might want to complain about that, or have a problem with that, or be frustrated with that and feel like that shouldn't be how it is. But actually it should. So if we can kind of make a shift and say, no, this is what should be happening. I should be completely reassessing my life and embrace it. We're going to find a lot of freedom. And so let's do that. Let's step into embracing the assessment and the reprioritizing. And choose that that's a good thing. Okay? So what matters? This is what we do. We sit and we assess what actually matters now. What matters to me? Walking through different crises puts a whole different perspective. Someone who's walked through a financial challenge is going to have a very different perspective on money after that challenge. Someone who's walked through the death of a loved one is going to have a more deep understanding of the fragility of life, and that's going to inform their decisions. And you could, and here's the deal though, again, you get to decide to make these choices and assessments from a place of faith and confidence and seeking the Lord, not fear. Because see, when we go through a crisis, we have a tendency, if we're not leaning on the Lord, the shifting and the reassessing and the reprioritizing, there's two ways to do it. You can do it in faith and you can do it in fear. See what that looks like in fear? Let's say you walked through a financial challenge. Well, what that's going to look like is now you're going to have a much more fearful thought about money. If you're operating in fear, you might start being more stingy. But if you're operating in faith, you're grateful and you're seeing all the ways the Lord provided for you. For example, several years ago, my husband lost his job. And he was unemployed for about 3 months and then underemployed for another 3 months before he finally got another job. Like, it was 6 months of major financial struggle. Like, and I'm talking, there were multiple times when my fridge was completely empty and like no food. And I opened the fridge and was like, well, we had baby food for my daughter. She was an infant and she was still breastfeeding and eating baby food, and we did have that. But we had baby food, but there was no food for my husband and I. Nothing. Maybe some ketchup. And I remember opening that fridge door and kind of being like, okay, we have no food. What are we going to do? And just praying and being like, okay, Lord, either you're going to provide food or you're going to give us the strength to fast until you do provide food. And that day a check showed up in the mail anonymously. Another time a check showed up from a friend that was not anonymous. But I could look back in that season and go like, oh my gosh, like that was so stressful and afraid. But you know what? If I was operating in fear, I'd look back in that season with fear and like, oh my gosh, I never want to be there again. That was so stressful and hard and blah, blah, blah. But that's operating in fear. When I'm operating in faith, I can look back on that season and see all the ways God provided. We never missed a meal. We never went hungry. We never missed a payment on any of our bills. Like somehow, I still look back and I look at those budgets and I look at the bank statements and I'm like, only God. I literally have no idea, because even looking at the numbers, like it doesn't line up. How did we not miss a payment? All that to say, those are two different ways of approaching a situation. And so, but because in that situation I chose to walk in faith, and coming out of it I chose to pursue faith as well, I can now look back on that with faith and use it as evidence that, you know what, no matter what things look like, I know God's got us. Similarly, walking through the death of my daughter, that I can look at that, and that if I'm operating in fear, that could lead to fear for my other children, and being hyper vigilant, and being kind of a helicopter mom, and overprotective and stressed and not able to leave them, and lots of things that could create a lot of those things, right? Or if I'm operating in faith and trusting the Lord, I can choose that to know and to believe and stand on, like, God's got my kids. God's got my kids, and they're his kids anyway. Like, I'm their mom. He's entrusting them to me, but they have eternal souls. And so I'm actually just stewarding these little eternal souls for however long the Lord just is allowing that. I get to, he's allowing me and entrusting me with these beautiful little people, these eternal souls, to love them and to be a model of Christ to them and to point them to him. And so from a place of faith, it gives me an urgency to love my children and to point them to Christ, because I've so intimately seen how fragile life is, that with my living children, I'm all the more committed to pointing them to Jesus. And that fundamentally shifts how we live our lives. So those are a couple examples of the difference between operating in fear and operating in faith. You get to decide. And you can make that decision right now. If you've been operating in fear up until now, you can just decide, you know what? Oh, I recognize I've been operating in fear. I'm going to start operating in faith. So stepping into that choice, and I'm going to be giving advice, suggestions, and a little bit of coaching based on the decision to operate in faith. If you're choosing to operate in fear, you have the freedom to make that choice. I would really encourage you not to, because the fruit of fear is going to lead to death, because fear and faith are opposing opposites. So if you're choosing to live in fear, first of all, it's a choice. You get to decide. If you want to live in, to shift into faith, but you're having a hard time with that, please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you and have a conversation and help support you make that shift, because it is just a choice. It literally can be a split-second decision, but sometimes when we're dealing with a lot of fear and a lot of trauma, it can be a little harder to make that decision. And so I would be more than happy to help you walk through that. So please reach out to me if that's something you're struggling with. But from here forward, I'm going to be talking as if you're choosing faith. Okay, so if you're choosing faith, there are 5 sets of questions, and I have this lovely little printable that I created. You can get it on my website. I will post the link in the video notes so that you can just go click and download this. It's a free download. And it's a set of questions. Okay, so it's not like a journal page. You'll see it's full of questions. Print this out and then use it in your own journal time. But there's 5 sets of questions. So it's not just 5 questions. There's quite a few questions, but they're kind of just different sets to help break it up. Because also when we're trying to get out of survival mode, trying to do all of this all at once can feel very overwhelming. So I've broken it up into little chunks of, if you wanted to make this like a 5-day process where each day you just journal with one set of questions. By the end of the week, you've journaled through these questions and you've kind of assessed your new priorities. So that's a resource for you. And I'll talk about these questions in a minute. Okay. But really the big things to do is decide, are you operating in fear? Are you operating in faith? If you're going to operate in faith, sit down and decide, what are your priorities right now? Because your actual desires might have even shifted since this crisis happened. So go download this printable, okay? Print it out. You could also have it on your phone if you want, because you'll get it in your email. Print it out is what I recommend, though. Have a physical copy. And if you have time, sit and do it all at once. But if it's a lot, because it's a lot of questions, you've got 5 days. So I'm going to read through some of these questions and kind of talk about them a little bit, though, right? So set one, the first set of questions, is what is working right now in this season? So if you're in a survival mode, you're trying to shift out of the survival mode into a new normal. What's working? What is working? What have you been doing and operating? How have you been operating in a way that's actually working and that you're happy about? Celebrate that. Notice that, celebrate that, and make the commitment to continue doing that. But then what's not working? What's no longer serving you? What's no longer fitting in this season? It makes me think about, I used to work outside the home. I used to have a job outside the home. And for me, once I got pregnant, that just didn't fit anymore. And that's not to say that people shouldn't work outside the home, that moms shouldn't work outside the home. God calls everyone differently. So everyone's convicted differently. Everyone's called differently. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's entirely a personal thing between you and God. But for me, for that season and moving forward, still the season I'm in, as of then and now, working outside the home just was no longer a good fit. The job itself was one that I did not align with anymore. I actually had some ethical problems with it. There were some ethical issues with my job that I just couldn't do it anymore from an integrity standpoint. And then getting pregnant, I just knew my desire was I wanted to stay home with my kids. And so I made the commitment that I'm going to figure it out and do whatever I needed to do and make whatever sacrifices I needed to make, but I was going to stay home. So I quit my job and stayed home. That was a season. Prior to that season, when I was working outside the home, I loved it. I loved my job. It fit and it was like a perfect fit for that season, but that season ended. Same thing with, it's just seasons. Life is seasons. If you have kids, you'll see this, right? Like they grow out of their clothes eventually, right? The clothes that fit them a season ago no longer fit them. Routines, systems, priorities, and even values can kind of shift. And that's okay. Like, it is okay if your values shift and what actually matters to you shifts. I went through a season where I was really, really committed and had a high value for and really convicted and just driven to do some projects, certain projects. And then the season was over, and now I don't even touch those projects. So all that to say, what values, choices, and systems no longer fit in this season? And this is entirely up to between you and the Lord, right? The next set of questions is, what hats do you wear, right? You need to, when we're wanting to assess and prioritize, we need to assess, what roles do I have to fill? Am I a wife? Am I a mom? Am I an employee? Am I a business owner? Am I a daughter? Am I a sister? Am I a friend? Homemaker? Chauffeur? What do you do? What are all the different roles that you fill, and hats that you need to wear, so that you know kind of like what do you need to do in a day? What matters to you and what's important? And then kind of looking at that too, what can only you do? What can only I do? This is the question I ask myself too. Like, someone else can, I have a work from home job. I work online doing teaching writing classes. And you know what? If I were to quit doing that today, another teacher would come along and pick up my classes and teach. There's a level to which, I'm good at my job. I love my job, and I'm very connected and valued in my job. But at the end of the day, I literally could quit and someone else will come fill that role. But I am my children's only mother. I can't, if I were to quit being my kid's mom, no one else can fill that. Literally no one else on earth can fill that role. I am the only person able to fill that role fully. Yes, there's adoption. Okay, 100%. And I'm all for adoption and think that that's absolutely wonderful. But at the end of the day, there still is an element of trauma when the mother is removed, right? Same thing with my husband. We're married. That is a commitment. I am the only person that can fill that role for him, biblically, from a biblical standpoint, if we want to be honoring the Lord. So kind of look at that. What roles can only you fill, and which roles are kind of like could be filled by somebody else or delegated to somebody else, because that helps you know what really matters, which ones, and to, again, prioritize, rank things. What is more important? When I look at it through what are uniquely mine, what roles are uniquely mine that only I can really fill? Well, that puts mom at number one, wife and mom at number one, before anything else. So assessing some of those things. Okay. Question set number 3. What fills my cup and feeds my soul? Another way to think of what do you love? What leaves you feeling just so refreshed? Is it taking a bubble bath? Is it a project you like to sew or cook or bake? What are some of those things that just leave you feeling just so full and content and happy? What drains you? That's another really great question. When you answer those questions, see what themes are there themes. And as you answer these questions, kind of assess and look at them. Are there themes? Can you see some themes running through any of these answers? What do you want more of in your life? And what do you want less of in your life? Question set 4. And these are two questions that I actually got from Crystal Payne. She's known on the internet as the Money Saving Mom. She's also the author of this amazing book, The Time Saving Mom. Highly recommend this book, okay? Because this book actually has a really fantastic section all about priorities too. So I'm sharing some of the things that I've done. These two questions actually come from this book, and the credit is also on the printable, you'll see, so that you can go like follow her, because she has some really great content. Absolutely love this book. Go pick up this book. I'll put the link in the comments. Because even if you're not a mom, like, this is so applicable. So I actually got these two questions from this book, from Crystal Payne. What will matter 10, 25, or 50 years from now? What's actually going to matter? Because if you think about that, especially when you're raising kids, like, in 10 years, is it really going to matter at what age your kid was potty trained? As long as they eventually get potty trained. Doesn't matter whether they were 3 or 5. In 50 years, is it really gonna matter? Is this thing that's really stressing you out really gonna matter in 50 years? It's not to invalidate things that are happening right now that feel urgent, but it's to help give perspective so that you know what really actually matters. Because if we make mountains out of molehills, and if we make a big deal out of littler things that don't really actually matter in the long run, we're going to major in the minors. We're going to lose out on a lot of what the Lord has for us. And some of the consequences and ripple effects of that can be really far-reaching. Connected to all that, what will matter at the end of my life? Like, when I'm dead, am I going to regret that my house had dirty floors a lot of the times? Or am I going to regret that I was always yelling at my kids for tracking in mud? For example. Question set 5. And none of these are in any particular order. I happen to put these at the end because I feel like the answer to these questions can really help bring clarity after we answer all these other questions. But this also could be like the first set of questions you answer, because we should incorporate the Lord in all of this. Because the last two questions are, what is the Lord calling me to focus on in this season? And what is he telling me to release in this season? Because here's the deal. Ultimately, as a Christian, we have the Holy Spirit inside of us, which means God will tell us. Through his Holy Spirit, God will tell us what matters, what we should be focusing on, and what should matter to us right now. So as you're answering these questions, it's important to be able to do some brain dumping. So I really encourage you, answer all of these questions, but be seeking the Lord as you do to get his perspective. What does he want? What is he leading you to focus on? Is he telling you that this is a season to focus on your marriage? Is this a season to focus on homeschooling? Is this a season to focus on a career? What are you to focus on right now? And what are you supposed to release? He will tell you. Seek him. Spend that time. Journal with him. Listen. Listen to his voice and obey what he shows you. That is huge. So this will be in the notes to go download this. All right. I just kind of went through those really quick and gave you some more like commentary. But download this, print it out, work through these. This is how you're going to assess what are your priorities now in this season. All right. So hopefully this was helpful. If this was helpful, please comment your biggest takeaway. I'd love to know like what encouraged you, what stood out to you as helpful. And if you know someone who could be blessed by this, please share it. And make sure you hit subscribe so that you don't miss the rest of our videos in this series over the next few weeks. All right. I will talk to you later.